Let's have a look at question 9 to 12. Now, this passage talks about utopia and the notion of various thinkers regarding utopia, a utopian society. A utopian society, for your information, is an ideal society where everybody is happy and it's things are like equal, communal. So this is how it has been defined. Now, we begin by talking about a thinker, Thomas More, who gave a notion of utopia, and he talked about it as an egalitarian communal society of shared property. So his notion, his vision was a very balanced vision, which wherein utopian hopes were balanced by dystopian fears. However, half a millennium since, what has happened is that we have acquired a more dystopian notion, and we are now overburdened with dystopian nightmares, right? So, our society today, the postmodern society, as this passage calls it, is burdened with dystopian nightmares. It does not have a roadmap as a positive roadmap for building a better world. Then it talks about how Karl Marx criticized the term utopian, the term utopia. Okay, Karl Marx felt that the utopian thinkers were giving a blueprint of an ideal society. However, they were not looking at the realistic forces in the process of giving this blueprint. They were ignoring those realistic forces. So, another thinker, Frederick Jameson, actually had a diametrically opposite view. He felt that utopian imagination was essential to human liberation. He said that the imaginative inability to conceive of positive systemic change is one of the hallmarks of postmodernism. That means that our postmodern society today is unable to think of any positive systemic change. Okay, why? Because it did not have a utopian imagination. So this is what Jameson said. Jameson's view is pretty important in this passage. Then we also talk about other thinkers, other leading figures. For instance, Margaret Thatcher, who felt that there was no alternative to conservatism, to conservative ethos. Then we talk about how Karl Marx criticized thinkers like Charles Fourier and Henry Dissent, who again were supporters of utopian idealism. In Marx's opinion, actually, scientific socialism was superior to utopian socialism. He felt that utopian socialism again was disconnected from reality, and Wallerstein also held the same views as Marx, and he said that utopias are breeders of illusions and therefore inevitably of disillusion. So again, he was a critique of utopia. Then, towards the end, we again talk about Jameson, and these are some of the most important sentences of the passage where we talk about how Jameson said that it is utopian, this utopian notion that keeps the hope of a better society alive, that keeps social agitation alive in the hope of a better society. So he insisted that it is difficult enough to imagine any radical political program today without the conception of systemic otherness, of an alternate society which only the idea of utopia seems to keep alive, however feebly. And then the author agrees with Jameson's notion that while a utopian imagination isn't sufficient in and of itself to build a better world, but it's an essential prerequisite. So, this is what this passage is about, the notion of various thinkers regarding a utopian imagination. 12. Which of the following cannot be inferred from the passage? Cannot be inferred. Okay. Now, A. People need to imagine a better world before they can build one. Go to the last paragraph. This is something that can be inferred. See, a utopian imagination is not sufficient in and of itself to build a better world, but it's an essential prerequisite. So you need to have a utopian imagination to build a better world. And that's why A is something that can be inferred. So this cannot be the answer then. B. Marx propounded scientific socialism based on actual historical dynamics and forces that could realistically bring about change. This part is there in the passage, although indirectly, so it is stated. Let's compare it with the other options. Many people would agree that there is no alternative to conservatism. This is distorted, clearly distorted. Okay, so I'll show you both of these right now. See here. Basically, Karl Marx said that the vision of utopian socialism, the vision of utopian socialism was not correct. It was a term of abuse. Why? because uh, these thinkers who actually use the term utopian socialism, they drew up blueprints for ideal societies without considering the actual historical dynamics and conjuncture of forces that would realistically bring about change. Okay. And then he said that scientific socialism was superior to utopian socialism. So perhaps scientific socialism was based on a consideration of the actual historical dynamics and all those forces that could bring about a change. So this can be inferred like this indirectly. And if I look at Margaret Thatcher's statement, sorry, it is here only. Yeah. Margaret Thatcher summed up the conservative ethos by saying there is no alternative. So she said this. If Thatcher was right, then utopian socialism is feckless and doomed to failure. Okay, and doomed to failure. And some on the left would agree. So Margaret Thatcher said this, that there is no alternative to conservatism, right? So now that we've seen both the pieces of evidence, let's eliminate. Um, it says some on the left would agree, right? Some on the left would agree. Now, what would they agree with? That there is no alternative to conservatism, or would they agree with if what Margaret Thatcher said is true, then utopianism is feckless and doomed? This is what they would agree with, right? If what Margaret Thatcher said is true, what did she say? That there is no alternative. Then then utopianism is feckless and doomed. This is what some people on the left would agree with. So first of all, some versus many. Secondly, they will not agree with this. They would rather agree with the fact that utopianism is feckless and doomed, distorted, and hence the answer. This indirectly can be inferred. Even this can be inferred that he was one of the traditional, radical thinkers who supported utopian idealism. It is stated in the passage. See, when we mention Frederick Jameson for the first time, the literary theorist Frederick Jameson argues that utopian imagination is essential to human liberation, right? And he's been called a radical thinker later on, that he was an exemplar of this tradition. This is mentioned. Just a second. There were these radical thinkers, tradition of radical thinkers who tried to redeem the idea of utopia in Marxist terms by insisting that a hope of a better society keeps social agitation alive. Jameson is perhaps the greatest living exemplar of this tradition. Right. So he supported utopian idealism. He was a radical thinker. Oh, that means we've verified option D. It exists in the passage and therefore cannot be the answer. Right. C. And I would say easy to moderate. Moderate for some students who actually got confused with this. Okay.